Widow with 7 stepchildren and 2 of her own. A childless banker adopted all 9 and her. The ledger's still got the stain on it. Tallow, I think, dripped off a candle the night the youngest cried until near dawn, and I sat up doing sums in lamplight just to have something for my hands to do. 31 years I've kept books, and that's the only mark in any of them I never tried to clean off. I want to tell it the way it actually came, not the way folks in town tell it now, all smoothed over like a story somebody already finished. It didn't come smooth. It came in pieces, the way most true things do, and I've got the pieces here in this book if you know where to look. May the 3rd, a withdrawal of $4 even, no note. That was the day I bought a crate of shoes off the back of Hadley's wagon, because I'd seen her oldest boy's toes coming through leather like spring through ice, and I didn't know yet that I'd be the one putting shoes on that family for the rest of my life. Start there, I suppose, May. I ran the bank in Cooper's Bend going on 19 years by then, and the town had me filed the way you file a deed, present, useful, dry. Widower-shaped, even though I'd never had a wife to lose, which is its own kind of lonesome nobody writes songs about. I had a house with 4 rooms I didn't use and a desk I used too much, and on Sundays I sat in the 3rd pew same as my father had, and I told myself a man could build a whole life out of being reliable. I half believed it. The other half of me knew reliable is just another word for unclaimed. Elinor Voss came into my bank on a Tuesday with mud to her ankles and a baby on her hip, and 8 more children strung behind her like. She was towing a wagon train on foot, and she set a cigar box on my counter and said, "I need to know what's left of nothing, mister, and I need you to tell me straight." I opened that box right there. Inside was a marriage certificate, a deed with a red stamp on it that meant the bank in Larrabee already owned more of that ranch than she did, and $41 in coin and scrip that wouldn't have covered the wagon repair she clearly needed before she covered anything else. Her husband had died in March. Wesley Voss, I'd extended him credit twice against my better judgment, because he had a way of looking a man in the eye that made you forget he hadn't paid the first loan back yet. Heart gave out behind a plow, she told me, flat as a table, like she'd already cried the wet part of that sentence out somewhere private, and what was left was just the bones of it. 7 were his from his first wife, dead of fever 2 winters back. 2 were hers and his together. 9 children, 1 woman, $41, and a ranch that belonged more to a bank in Larrabee than to anybody standing in my office. I did what a banker does. I told her the truth. The truth was bad. She didn't flinch at it, which is the first thing I want you to understand about her, because everything after only makes sense if you start there. She heard bad news the way some women hear weather. Something to plan around, not something to break under. She asked me 3 questions, sharp as nails. Could the loan be restructured? Could she keep the well field if she gave up the north pasture? Was I the kind of man who'd say yes to her face and call the note in behind her back? I told her I wasn't, and I meant it, and something in the way I said it must have landed, because she looked at me a second longer than business required and said, "All right then," and that was the whole of our first conversation. No softness in it. I didn't expect any. I'd stopped expecting that kind of thing from anybody a long time before that Tuesday. I want to be honest and say I didn't fall for her that day. What happened that day was smaller, and I've come to think, truer, I respected her. I'd watched plenty of grown men come into my office and either beg or bluster, and here was a woman with 9 mouths to feed who did neither. She negotiated. She had a county map half memorized in her head, and she knew exactly which acres were worth fighting for and which weren't. When I told her the Larrabee Bank would likely foreclose within the year regardless of what I did, she didn't cry. She asked what I'd do in her position. I told her I'd sell off the equipment before the bank could lien it, keep the milk cow, and start looking for work that paid cash weekly. She wrote that down. Wrote it on the back of the marriage certificate, if you can believe that, because it was the only paper she had on her that wasn't already spoken for. June, I started visiting the ranch on Sundays after church, telling myself and everybody else it was a banker's duty to monitor a troubled note. Nobody believed that excuse past the second visit, including me. The truth was the house had a sound to it I didn't have in my own. 9 children make a particular kind of noise, layered, constant, like a creak you stop hearing after a while, except you do hear it. You feel it in your chest when it goes quiet for even a minute. The oldest boy, Thomas, was 14 and already carrying himself like a man who'd been handed his father's job without being handed his father's years. He didn't trust me. Smart of him not to. I was a banker in a clean coat showing up at his dead father's ranch, and any boy with sense would have watched me close. I let him watch. I didn't try to win him with talk. I picked up a hammer the third Sunday I was there, and fixed a hinge on the barn door that had been dragging since before I ever set foot on the place. And I didn't say a word about it, and I saw him notice. That's the kind of man I am, I suppose, if I'm any kind at all. I don't talk people into things. I show them with my hands and let them decide what it means. By July, there were 2 more visits than Sundays could account for, and Alina had stopped pretending she didn't know why. We were standing at the well one evening, the children inside, the light doing that long gold thing it does out here before it gives up the day, and she said to me, "You ought to know I can't offer you what you're circling around, Mr. Garrett. I have 9 children and a debt and a dead husband. I haven't finished grieving proper, and any man wants more than that from me is going to leave disappointed." I told her I wasn't circling for what she thought. I told her, and this is near word for word, because I've turned it over enough times in my head to have it memorized. I said, "I've got a house with 4 rooms nobody's ever slept in, and a ledger full of other people's lives, and not 1 page of my own. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm telling you I'd rather spend my Sundays fixing your hinges than sitting alone in a pew being looked at like a man everybody's sorry for." She didn't answer that night. I didn't ask her to. August came in hot, and then it came in hard. The Larrabee Bank called the note. I'd seen it on the books before she did. That's the curse of my trade. You see ruin coming the way a man on a ridge sees weather, long before the people in the valley feel the first drop. And I rode out that Thursday to tell her in person instead of by letter, because some news a person deserves to receive from a face and not a page. She took it the way she took everything. Square. Then she sat down on the porch step like her legs had finally agreed with what her spine had been arguing against for months, and she put her face in her hands, just for a moment, just long enough that I understood the squareness cost her something every single time. I sat down next to her. I didn't touch her. I said, "What if I bought the note myself?" She looked at me like I'd offered to buy the moon. Said I'd be a fool. Said 9 children and a debt-ridden spread wasn't an investment. It was a sinkhole with a roof on it, and she wouldn't let me throw good money after a dead man's bad decisions out of some misplaced. And here she stopped, because she couldn't find the word, and I watched her hunt for it and not find it, and that not finding told me more than the sentence would have. I bought the note anyway, did it through the bank, proper and legal, restructured the terms so the payments were something a widow with a milk cow and grit could actually meet. Didn't tell her the interest I set was near nothing. Didn't need to. The numbers were right there in black ink for her to find whenever she went looking, same as I'd find them if I were her. And she did go looking about 3 weeks later, and she rode into town and stood in my office with that same square jaw and said, "You cheated me on the rate." I said I priced the risk accurately. She said the risk on 9 children and a ranch with a dead man's name still on the deed. I said the collateral was good. I believed in it. She knew what I meant. I watched her know it. And she didn't say thank you because that woman doesn't say thank you for things that ought to be obvious between 2 people who respect each other. She said, "You'll come to supper Sunday, and don't bring your banker's coat. Bring the one you fix hinges in." September, the children started calling me by name instead of Mr. Small thing. Wasn't small at all. The 2 littlest, hers and Wesley's together, a boy of 4 and a girl barely 2, took to me the easiest, the way young ones do, climbing onto whatever lap is offered without asking whose lap it is or why. The older ones took longer, and rightly so. They'd already lost a father. A man doesn't get to walk into that kind of grief and expect open arms just because he's kind on Sundays. Thomas was the one I worked hardest for and earned slowest. He was angry, and not at me specifically, angry at the whole shape of his life. At being 14 and already the man of a house that had too many people in it and not enough of anything else. I started taking him with me on bank business, paying him a real wage to keep ledgers for small accounts, teaching him sums the way my own father never had the patience to teach me. Wasn't charity. I told him that plain, I need a clerk and you've got a head for numbers, and I'm not paying you to feel sorry for you, I'm paying you because you're good at this. He sat up straighter the first time I said it. I watched a boy's spine change shape in real time, watched him decide he was worth something other than what grief had made of him. By October, I'd asked Alina to marry me, and she'd told me to ask again in the spring, when she'd know her own mind clear of grief and gratitude both tangled up together. And I respected that more than I can say, because a lesser woman would have said yes out of relief, and a lesser man would have taken it. I want to tell you about the night the youngest cried until dawn, because that's the night the tallow stained this book, and that's the night I understood what I was actually signing up for, before any preacher made it official. It was November. Cold snap came early that year. The baby girl, Sarah, 2 years old, the very last of what Wesley left behind, had taken a fever, and Alina had been up 2 nights running already with 3 of the others down with the same sickness. And I rode out in the dark because Thomas sent a boy to fetch me, said his mother needed another set of hands, or she was going to fall down where she stood. I got there near midnight. The house was a fever house, the particular smell of it, vinegar and sweat and tallow smoke, and Alina had circles under her eyes dark as bruises and hadn't sat down in I don't know how many hours. I didn't ask what to do. I picked up the baby, who was burning and miserable and screaming the way only the very young can scream, with their whole bodies, no shame in it at all, and I walked her. Just walked her up and down that front room, hour after hour, while Alina tended the others, and somewhere around 3 in the morning Sarah quieted against my shoulder. Not because I'd done anything clever, just because exhaustion finally won out over fever. And I sat down in the rocker with her asleep on my chest. And I did sums in the ledger by lamplight because my hands needed work even with my arms full, and that's when the candle dripped. Alina found me there near dawn. Said she'd never in her life seen a banker rock a feverish child to sleep while balancing accounts one-handed. And there was something in her voice I hadn't heard before, not gratitude, past gratitude, something that sounded more like recognition. Like she was finally looking at the whole of me, and not just the parts I'd shown her on Sundays. She sat down across from me, didn't take the baby, just sat and looked, and after a while she said, "You're not circling anymore, are you?" I said, "No, ma'am, I believe I've landed." She reached over and put her hand flat on my chest, right over where Sarah's small back rose and fell with sleep, and she said, "Then I suppose you ought to ask me again, and I don't believe either one of us needs to wait for spring." I asked her right there, no ring on me, no plan to it, just a tired man and a tired woman and a sleeping child between us in the gray hour before sunrise. And she said yes with her hand still flat on my chest like she was checking my heart was steady, which I suppose it was, finally, for the first time in longer than I could account for. We married in February, in the same little church where I'd sat alone in the 3rd pew for 19 years, and this time the pew was full. 9 children lined up like steps on a staircase, Thomas standing tall in a coat I'd had made for him special. The 2 littlest fighting over who got to hold the ring before the preacher took it off them both and gave them each a peppermint to settle the dispute. Alina wore blue, not white, because she said white belonged to a different chapter of her life, and she wasn't interested in pretending otherwise. And I loved her more for the honesty of that than I would have loved any lie dressed up pretty. I adopted all 9 of them legal and proper that spring, every signature done in my own hand at my own desk, because I wanted it on paper the way everything important in my life had always been on paper, not because paper makes a thing true, but because paper makes a thing impossible to take back. Thomas asked to keep his father's name as a middle name, and I told him that was right and good, that a man should carry where he came from even as he walks toward where he's going, and I believe that's true for more than just names. The town still calls me the banker, always will, I expect. But these days when I walk down the main street of Cooper's Bend, I've got Sarah on my hip more often than not, and somewhere behind me there's a string of children calling out questions and complaints and small triumphs, and Alina walking alongside me with that same square jaw, except it's not braced against bad news anymore. It's just hers, the way it was always meant to look on a woman who finally got to stop fighting alone. That ledger's still in my desk, tallow stain and all. I never did clean it off, and folks who see it sometimes ask why a man so particular about his books would leave a mess like that sitting in the middle of an otherwise tidy column. I tell them it's not a mess. It's the one entry in 31 years of bookkeeping that finally balanced something worth balancing.